How's it going? I'm Jared Gillis. Welcome to another All About RVs. If this is your first time here, you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because we got new stuff coming out all the time. And today we're going to be talking about 5 things that kind of plague RVers, or something that comes up that could be a problem that once you know how to handle it, it's not really that big of a problem. I had an email about somebody that was kind of turned off from RVing because it seems like it's just plagued with tons of problems and something to fix all the time. And if you know how to handle these things, they're really not that big of a deal. It's no more than, say, living in a house or maintaining a car or something like that. So let's dive right into it. So one of the big problems, no, I say big problems, one of the problems you can have in your RV is maybe a busted water line, and maybe it might be intimidating. You look under there and you see the PEX plastic piping, and what do you do with that? So I just keep a couple of small things on the rig. They don't weigh too much, and they don't really take up that much space, but I use some of these. This one's actually like a shutoff. This one's kind of handy because you can almost use it as like a cap or something. But with the PEX piping that they're putting in these rigs, you can use something extremely simple like this. And if you have a problem, say you had a pipe freeze, or maybe the pressure was too high before you put on the pressure regulator and something popped, so you're able to cut out that bad section of pipe. But you can take this guy and you can just push it right onto the PEX. I mean, it's literally that easy, and you can take these off by pulling that in and pulling this right off. But the cool thing about this is if you cut out that bad piece of pipe, push this PEX piece on there, and now you have a shut off and a turn back on. So if you needed to do something like that, where you needed to continue working on it, but you wanted to get water to the rest of the rig, this little guy comes in awful handy in a pinch. So I also keep a few other of these pieces. This is just like a compression fitting. You're just going to basically jam this into the pipe after you put this on there. This little nut goes on there, and you're gonna jam that into the pipe and work it in there real good, and then you're gonna tighten that down, and it's gonna be a compression fitting for on this PEX piping. And if you didn't want to buy this fitting, if you wanted to just pick up something from Home Depot, they have those Shark Bite push-on fittings. They actually work really well, and I've seen them in years of service in different homes. So handy little thing. Get some kind of coupler cap connector that might be easy to have on hand. I'll put links into the description to any of the products that I'm talking about today, so they're just real easy to find. But while we're talking about leaks, why don't we talk about the other areas in your RV that could have potential for leaks? So the roof, any of those seals that need to be addressed, anything around the windows. We had a window on our door the other day that was leaking when the rain was driving that way. The seal was just gone around the glass. It's just after years of use, the seal just wasn't functioning properly anymore. So there's a couple of ways that you can tackle a project like this, and it's better to tackle it when you're at home or in a place where you can work on it easily, rather than being out camping or RVing and then you realize that you have a leak. So doing some inspection and checking these seals out before you get out on the road is always a great idea. Sticking towels on the roof when you're out RVing, trying to stop that leak, isn't always the best of nights when that happens. But the couple of options that you have, you can cut away the area. Like if you see an area of caulking or that seal that's cracked, I recommend cutting it out, trying to get back to kind of the frame of the window or the frame of whatever's put into your roof or your wall, and cut out the bad seal. If you're doing it on the roof, don't cut through your EPDM roofing. But if it's on the wall, fiberglass, cut it out and be able to get a good seal. Just don't cover up the bad caulking or bad seal. Try and cut out as much of it as you can to replace that. Now, if you want to take it a step further, like I did on this window, I pulled the whole window out and I scraped any of that inside sealant and just removed it, cleaned it up, got it all the way down to the base materials, and then I put a new bead in there, put it back together. This thing should be great for a long time. I shouldn't have to think about this window again. Now, the sealants that I recommend for sealing up something like this on an RV is almost always the Dicor product. They have two different kinds. One is used on the vertical surfaces, so around the doors and the windows. And then they have another one that's a self-leveling lap sealant that is great on the EPDM roofs. Up on the roof, you can use those. They self-level, obviously, and they work fantastic. Now, I know some people love to keep that Eternabond tape on hand, and it's not a bad idea to keep that on hand. If you had maybe something scratch your roof, or you hit it against a branch and you have a little puncture in it, you can use that Eternabond tape. It'd be fantastic for something like that. Now, on this project, I used this stuff. It's a quad by OSI, and it worked well for this application, but almost all the time I recommend the Dicor product. It really is a good deal. Now let's talk about propane, because propane is one of those things that I've seen a very typical common denominator when trying to diagnose propane problems. And oftentimes people think that they have an issue with their device, like their stove or their water heater or something else. And oftentimes you can have problems with those. You can have an issue with your dual energy refrigerator where maybe that propane's not igniting properly, and you could have an issue there. But I think it's always really good first to look at the propane source. So obviously you have propane in the propane tank, but that pressure regulator at the propane tanks I have seen fail more times than not when somebody's trying to deal with their propane. So sometimes they'll leak, spewing propane out, which is obviously a massive problem. You want to swap that thing out as quick as you can. I've also seen where they don't supply as much propane as they should be, or as they once did, and you'd think that you have like clogged orifices on your range or your oven or something like that. And really it's just that pressure regulator not allowing the proper amount of propane to be delivered to the appliances. So if you're trying to troubleshoot the propane, start first with your pressure regulator and then move on down to your appliances and see if there's an issue there. But that propane regulator, pressure regulator, often goes out and is easily replaced. When you replace it, make sure you get the proper type of compound or propane tape for some of those seals when you're putting that propane regulator back together. They go together pretty easily, and there's not much to them, just a couple of pipe fittings and you're good to go. Now, if we're talking about a list of problems you can have with RVs, you have to talk about being able to continue to roll down the road. And the tire is right in the center of that subject. So we've done a whole video on tires with date codes and inflation and all those things. So check that out if you haven't seen that video. We're getting ready to upgrade our tires or swap out our tires here. We just ordered these. They are a Saloon. They're a Class G, so they're a step up from what we have. They're kind of overkill potentially for the trailer, but I think that's good. They're going to be a really strong tire. I'll let you know more about it as we use them and what we think of them as we roll down the road. But make sure that you have a good spare, that you know how to take it down. You have all the tools to be able to change it out, a jack and all that. So if you do have a blowout or an issue, a flat tire, whatever, you're able to get that swapped out and get you rolling back down the road. But in the middle of this, we also have bearings that we need to keep up on the maintenance. So when we swap out our tires, we're going to repack our bearings. I've pulled them off and I've repacked them before, and it's not really that difficult if you wanted to repack your own bearings. But when we're having the tires swapped out, I'm just going to have the place that's doing the tires repack our bearings, because you want that lubricant in there so that you're not building up any heat. You don't want that bearing to break down, because if that happens, you're not going to be going anywhere with a busted bearing in there, a burnt out bearing. So keep maintenance on your bearings. And then also down here we have suspension parts that can potentially wear out. We had some wear out and I didn't keep a close enough eye on it, and these brackets that hold the tandem axles together for the suspension it ended up just blowing out the one end, and those parts under there with your suspension, it's a good idea to keep a good visual inspection on them to make sure nothing's looking like it's wearing out or getting ready to fall apart. So they're not real difficult to swap out, but there's options out there if you wanted to upgrade that system too. There's a couple that I'd love to check out. There's the Moride system. There's the I think the Equiflex or something like that. Some great systems with wet bolts
so that some of those things don't wear out as easily. Like what we have on here now, instead of having a wet bolt that you can grease and grease would fill in where this is having to rub metal to metal, we have these little guys that they're just like a little bushing to kind of keep that wear from metal to metal down. But you want to keep an eye on these suspension components so that something doesn't wear out while you're going down the road. One more thing that we did down here is we took Mark and Trisha's recommendation and we welded some metal on the ends of our leaf spring hangers, because it adds so much strength to where your axles are. I mean, that's what's suspending your trailer up, and it adds so much strength to those. It's kind of like, if you can, why not do it? It's just going to be a safe way. So let's move on to electrical.
The RV electrical system, it's hard to say this is where the problem always is, or this is always where you need to look. It is a complex system, and that's why I plan to do more videos about RV electrical so that you can understand it, and understanding it will help you diagnose and solve any problems that come up that much quicker. So I like to approach it almost like a game of Guess Who, so I can eliminate a lot of things and narrow it in on where I'm actually having the problem. So first question I usually ask, is it on the 120 volt side or is it on the 12 volt side? Now the 120 volt side, you're gonna have things like your microwave, your outlets, your TV. Those are the typical things you're gonna find on the 120 volt side. Now on the 12 volt side, you're gonna have things like your lights, your vent fans, your slides, your jacks. Those are going to be the things on the 12 volt side. So let's say we're looking at the 120 volt side system. In the first place, I usually look, if I have a lot of things out, I'm going to look at that pedestal to see if that pedestal that I plugged into, is that breaker tripped? Is there an issue with that breaker? Find out if your RV is actually receiving power. And then if that's good, I go to the circuit panel down below where the breakers are going to be. And I'm going to look at the main coming in. I'm going to look at all the different circuits and see if I have something tripped. Most of the time, you're able to trip a breaker off, trip it back on, and you're back up and running. I mean, it's just like a home. There's not much to it. Now, you might have an issue further down the line with a device, but then once you're eliminating some of those things, you can narrow it down and figure out which device you need to fix or replace. Now on the 12 volt side, it's a little bit different than a home, because we're going to have fuses and circuit breakers and different things like that along the way. So if I'm looking on the 12 volt side, the first place I'm going to look, if I have a lot of things not working, is my disconnect. Is my disconnect from my battery open or something like that? So you can look there. If you do have things running, but it's only maybe a certain circuit, you can go and check out your fuses. So these are easy to check. You can either put a multimeter and check each side of the fuse, or the easiest way to do it is to just grab some needle nose pliers, pull a fuse out, look at it, and see if that connecting circuit in between those two terminals is good or bad. If it's bad, you're able to replace it. Maybe that circuit just got overloaded for some reason. Maybe you did something to overload it. You're able to swap this and get it back up and going. Now, it's important to remember when you're pulling out a fuse and you're replacing it, is to look at the number that's on the fuse and replace it with the same type of fuse. So if you're pulling out a 30 amp fuse, don't put in a 20 or a 40. You're going to want to put in a 30 amp fuse. If you go lower than that, that fuse is going to pop extremely easy and it's going to be annoying. You're going to be in the same spot again. And if you go above it, then it's not protecting the wires and the devices past that fuse is supposed to be protecting. Now, another thing we see in these RVs is we'll see these type of circuit breakers on the 12 volt side, and they're usually automatic. So you'll have power coming in and power going out. And if there is an issue where these trip, these typically are automatic, so that you don't have to go and press a button or anything like that. These guys are great for that. But one of the things we do have to look out for is sometimes they'll hide these fuses. I don't know why they do that. They kind of hide these fuses around, like on trailers. They'll put these on the tongue to protect the jack, the electric jack, for putting it up and down. And so you might have a hard time finding one like this. So you can, if your jack's not working, you might look on the tongue to see if you have a blown fuse in a little inline set up like this. So these are things to look out for. They can be hard to find sometimes. Well, that's going to wrap up our 5 things, and most of these are just taken care of with just good maintenance with your RV. So if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, and if we don't see you on the road, hopefully we'll see you in the next video.